I feel like a weekly dinner party is essentially minimum viable community. And the key thing is hosting weekly, essentially. Like the key thing is the consistency. And so the way you do it is you want to make hosting so easy that you can do it every week. And so I think a lot of times when people host, especially if they don't host too often, it's kind of like, they fully clean their house and they cook this amazing, 4-course meal. And so we would host a weekly dinner party, but it was like super grungy. It was like, we'd spend 5 minutes cleaning beforehand. We kind of developed a system for turning our apartment from like regular mode into party mode. And then we actually would not cook. We would order Thai food. And Thai food, I think, is like an amazing party secret because it really accommodates a lot of dietary needs. So overall, I think it's like the optimal party food. And basically every week we would just order a bunch of Thai food. We would kind of like press a few buttons and transform our space. And we'd spend 5 minutes cleaning up and then we would welcome all our friends.
Let's start with, where are you right now? How many people do you have in this community of people that you've brought together, and how is it working? How is it feeling?
Yeah, totally. So there's actually two fractals. The first fractal is the one that's been publicized a lot more. And that has about 35 people all living in the same apartment building in Brooklyn. And it's thriving. We launched something called Fractal University. So that's basically just like teaching classes to people both within the community and outside the community as well. And we offer things like painting and freestyle rap and coding. But then that's outside of kind of that more formal organization. We also just host a ton of events. But it's totally decentralized. So basically, like anyone in the community can host an event if they want to. And that results in like infinite events, basically, like every day of the week, there's something going on. And then we have a third space, which is kind of just like a place you can co-work or host in. And so essentially that's where I am right now. I'm kind of on the bottom floor of the co-working space. And you can just show up anytime. You can do your work and kind of like chit chat when you want to take a break. And then we have Fractal 2. Fractal 2 is like brand new. I've actually barely spoken about it. So this is like a breaking news. But Fractal 2 is essentially another neighborhood in Brooklyn. And it's a result of, I'm expecting my first child, my husband and I are. And we decided to start kind of a similar thing as Fractal, except in a more child-friendly neighborhood. And it's a little bit more of a child-friendly setup, I would say. So it's more of the concept of living within walking distance, like a 10-minute walk of a bunch of our closest friends, as opposed to all being in the same apartment building, which was a blast, but is definitely, I think maybe more of a blast when you're younger. And then as you kind of like need a little bit more of your own space, it's been really nice to kind of like have our own house, although we live with a handful of close friends, but then to have a lot of friends nearby who I also spend a lot of time with, co-work with, hang out with, etc.
Exciting. And I know I watched a video of you before, and you were talking about your plans to have children and how you wanted that to be part of it. And I think at the time, because it was a theory, friends were like, yeah, but you don't have them yet. So I don't know if I can buy into this idea. Now that this has evolved, have more people come forward that have got families or thinking about having families?
Yeah, definitely. So our new neighborhood, we already live within a 10-minute walk of two friends who have families. One has two kids, one has one kid. And then we live within like a short subway ride of a couple of other people who are expecting. And I think one thing we learned was when we chose the neighborhood, we were, there's like a lot of different factors to consider. And it's not the most family friendly neighborhood. And I think we thought we could kind of overcome that. But really, like when you have kids, you have certain needs. A lot of people want to be near parks. They want to be obviously near good schools. They want to be near grocery stores. And you want to be in a neighborhood that feels, clean and safe and calm. And Fractal One is a blast, but it's in like this kind of grungy industrial neighborhood. It's very hip. It's got great coffee shops and a lot of art. But definitely it is a neighborhood that's kind of built for young people. And I think the longer I've stayed in New York, the more I've understood that there's like kind of neighborhoods for different life stages. And actually, I've kind of seen our whole friend group and seen kind of shift as they move through their different life stages.
And so you've already moved.
Yes.
And how have you felt that shift from this building of people that you've co-created together and brought together? Are you still spending some time in that kind of co-working space? And
Yeah, so I'm back in Fractal One, just hanging out here. And yeah, I love to come back. I mean, I think it's definitely at this point much more dynamic than our second Fractal, just because it's larger and it's been around a lot longer. So coming back here feels like entering chaos mode in the best way. I don't know, you can just never predict what's going to happen, who you're going to talk to, and where that will lead. I was just having a conversation with a friend who is apparently looking for a job. And so we were like talking for a while, and I was like, I actually think my other friend is hiring for something that you'd be really good at. And then I ended up putting them in a group chat, and that's going forward. And so, yeah, it kind of feels like just there's a lot of dynamism of bringing a lot of people together and having like all these kind of spontaneous interactions.
beautiful. And and this thing about hooking people up and inspiring each other to be brave and bold. And this is a theme that I love in my life. My partner and I have emigrated from the UK to Canada, and we've taken some like big, brave, bold risks. And one of the examples that I loved was about a guy who was a poet and just mentioned that he was a poet but wasn't really doing anything with it. And then do you want to just tell the story about what someone encouraged him to do and what that led to him doing with his poetry?
Yeah, that's still one of my favorite Fractal stories. So essentially, we used to always host these weekly dinners. And at weekly dinner, we would have something called lightning talks, where you could just stand and speak in front of the crowd, and you could really say anything you wanted. The floor was yours for, let's say, 3 minutes. And our friend stood up and he said, "I'm a poet, but I don't know what that means." And basically, he had been writing poetry for himself for years. I don't know, maybe his whole life. He had been writing poetry for himself, but he had been too shy to share it, and it's not what he was doing in his day-to-day life. And he kind of wanted to step into that more. And so basically audience members raised their hands and kind of like asked him questions and gave him advice. And one person raised their hand and said, "You should go to Central Park with a typewriter and you should put up a sign that says donation-based poetry. And then you should just like spontaneously write poems for people." And the crazy thing is that he ended up doing it later that week. And then he came back to dinner the next week and he basically told us, like, from I think maybe 1 or 2 days writing poetry in the park, he said, "I've made enough money to pay my rent. I've made enough money to pay back money that I owed my ex-girlfriend. And I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to become a full-time park poet."
Amazing, amazing. And just having that camaraderie of people to say, do it. And also the
Exactly.
accountability to know that he was going to be returning the following week to see the same people who might say, hey, did you do anything with that advice?
Exactly. And I think part of it is that it makes it like less scary to fail, because there is a counterfactual that maybe he went and tried to write poems in the park and it just actually wasn't quite the right fit for him. And maybe, he floundered and people didn't donate very much. And then he could still come back the next week. And I think it could just be like a fun story to share with us instead of feeling like a deep failure. But it turns out he's like actually really, really good at writing spontaneous poetry, and it all worked out.
So good. So let's take a step back, like to suddenly go from creating this incredible community, like where did you get the inspiration from? And I know you started in a different area in the States. And I'd love to know if community building has been a theme through your life or if it really started with co-living that you started doing over there.
Yeah, definitely. So I used to live in San Francisco, and in San Francisco there's like this huge co-living scene. Like there's hundreds and hundreds of co-living houses. And I've actually always been curious to understand the history, and I don't totally understand it, but I think some of it goes all the way back to the hippies. Like hippies were sharing houses together. Also, San Francisco and New York just have quite high rent, and so young people often have to have roommates. And so I think there's kind of a desire of like, okay, if we're going to have roommates, then we might as well make this really fun. But basically, what happened is I was just living in San Francisco, totally unaware of this. I kind of just met somebody at a party and we hit it off. And he was like, "Oh, you should come over to my house for, some other event." And so I went to his house, and it was like this, I don't know, 25-person co-living house. It was like a grand mansion and threw really crazy events. And I just started going somewhat regularly. And that was my introduction to the co-living scene. And then I decided to, well, I wanted to join a co-living house, but actually the supply and demand of co-living is strange in that I think people like get introduced to co-living and they're like, wow, this is like such a fun way to live. And so even though there's hundreds of co-living houses in San Francisco, getting into a co-living house can be a little bit hard. And so I had like reached out to my favorite co-living houses and I was like, I would love to live there. And basically they were all like, well, we don't have a room open. And at the time I was actually trying to get a room with me and my now husband, but then boyfriend. And they were like, oh, we're worried about taking couples because you guys might break up. And I don't know, basically everyone was giving us all these soft no's. And we're very impatient people. And so we were just like, you know what, we're going to start our own. And then we did. And that was kind of the beginning of my co-living journey. But to your question of have I always built community, I think I looking back, like we could tell a story that I did, but I don't think that's really the case. I mean, I led some clubs in college. And so maybe it's like I took on leadership roles, so to speak, and you know, some of that involves bringing people together. But I don't think it was like clear in previous years that that was kind of a direction I was going to go in.
So then you run this kind of co-living space in San Francisco, and then you shifted to New York. And then was it kind of a natural evolution? So you had your space in New York, and then I understand a space came up across the hall.
Exactly. Yeah. So actually, so we were living in San Francisco when COVID hit, and we were running this co-living house. And that was like slightly traumatic. It was like actually very difficult to be in a co-living house during COVID because people had very different ideas of how much they wanted to self-isolate. And some people were very worried and were spraying down all their groceries, and other people wanted to see their friends. And so it was fun in many ways, but also it was difficult. And essentially, by the time that lease ended, we decided like, okay, we need a break from co-living, and also the world was still a little bit shut down, and we ended up kind of wandering around the states and ending up in New York. And so when we were in New York, we just got an apartment. Just it was a 3-bedroom apartment. We lived with some friends, but we intended to just live like a normal life, no co-living. But then yeah, the apartment up across the hall opened up, and at the time, like we had a number of friends trying to move to New York, and so we basically asked one of our friends if they wanted to sign a lease on that apartment. And then suddenly, and that was a 4-bedroom apartment. So suddenly, like 3 bedrooms and 4 bedrooms, plus my partner and I were sharing a room. So there were 8 of us, which is basically, you know, the size of a good co-living house. And it was very cool. It's like, I mean, it's basically out of Friends, the sitcom.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of sitcoms are kind of structured like that. It's basically like, you know, a bunch of friends in New York City who have apartments near each other and get to hang out a lot because it's very convenient. And from there, we realized that this is kind of not necessarily a better model of co-living, but just like a different model of co-living with different trade-offs that I think we preferred, which is nobody has to take on like the responsibility of like a big lease or the responsibility of filling like a ton of rooms. Instead, you encourage your friends to sign other apartments in the building. It also means that you kind of have your own private space. You get to decide, you know, how you want to decorate your living room and kind of what cleanliness norms you want. And you only deeply need to be able to live with, let's say, 2 or 3 other people if you were to have a multi-bedroom apartment, as opposed to, you know, infinite. So now we've been able to scale. We have over 35 people, but you know, some of those people, I think if they were living in the same apartment or the same house even, might be at odds because some people are messier and some people are louder and some people go to bed later. But instead, there's a lot less conflict, I think, here than in a lot of co-living situations.
And is there anything like regular that brings people together, like weekly or monthly, that invites everybody to come together to really kind of keep that community spirit?
So in the beginning, there was. In the beginning, for the first year, we used to run a dinner every Sunday. And it wasn't just for us, it was pretty open to all of our friends. And so it was all the people who lived there, plus like we had a big community of other friends who didn't move in for whatever reason, but really loved coming and kind of felt like part of the community. At this point, no, there's no event like that, but there are also infinite events. So
Yeah.
it's a little bit less cohesive, but also the goal is if you move in here, you should either have or make 3 to 5 close friends who live in the building, and then maybe have 10 or more friends who are kind of like one layer out, who you still love hanging out with and collaborating with. And then kind of you have this community around you. So that's kind of my goal. It's like meant to not necessarily be one cohesive thing.
Mm.
Because I think that can, I don't know, in some ways it can be fun, but in some ways I think it can add a lot of stress. So,
Right.
so yeah.
This is really curious because this was what I was thinking as well when I saw your past video and it was saying that you were looking to scale even to like 1,000 people. And I was like, that sounds like a lot. And in my research, I came across something called Dunbar's number. I don't know if that's something that's been on your radar before, but
It
um,
has.
his theory is that our brains can only maintain 150 social connections, but then there's different spheres, and that closest sphere is 3 to 5, 12 to 15, and it goes out to 50, then 150. So yeah, just thinking about that, just making it feel manageable. And and like you said, like you don't have to be best friends with everybody, but so long as you can find your interests and find subgroups within the whole that are going to speak to you, then it works. And I love the idea of self-management. Part of my master's research, I read a book called Reinventing Organizations by Frederick Laloux. And this was all about self-managing teams and the sizes, again, of self-managing teams. I think he said between 12 and 15 people is a really nice number for self-managing teams. So I guess in those subgroups, I'd be curious to know what sizes they tend to be. And then Robin Dunbar said again, he said there's the number 40. As soon as groups get bigger than 40, it becomes very hard for them to manage themselves without some kind of leadership.
Yeah, totally. I think the best metaphor for what I intend Fractal to be is a campus, like a college campus. And college campus can have thousands of people or hundreds of thousands of people. And the goal is not all of those people, or you're friends with all of those people or anything like that. It's more just like you're bringing together a lot of people who are in the same life stage, who are often open to connections and friends, and who also just get to live within a close walk of each other. And so I think that's why so many people have like these beautiful memories of college, because when you
Mm.
do make friends, they're all really close to you. And so you get to hang out with them as much as you want. And you get to grow with them and you get to take classes with them. And so that's kind of the goal, is just to kind of like be a beacon to bring a lot of people together. And then you kind of create your own social world within that.
Mm. And loneliness is something that I've been researching a lot, and cities can be the loneliest places to live. Even though there's thousands of people all around you, you can feel completely isolated and actually not see anyone if you don't really put yourself out there. So I think this sounds like such a beautiful initiative to bring people together and let them know, let them put events on, let other people put events on, and having that space, finding affordable space to host events, even if you want to, can be really challenging. So having that space dedicated for members of the Fractal to put on whatever events they want to, that sounds like such a blessing. What kind of feedback have you had from like new members, and do people tend to stay? Or do people stay for a certain amount of time and then they move on, or do they just stay?
Yeah. So okay, new members are often like very enchanted, and yeah, we get this like gushing feedback, really. Like people who are just like, wow, I'm so happy I found this. You know, they're making friends so quickly, they're having really stimulating conversations. They're like, I think, deeply surprised that something like this exists. And then over the course of the next couple of months, oftentimes people will take big risks, like our friend Charlie, who became a poet. So they'll like quit their job, or just make some other major life decision. and that's really fun to watch. There are a lot of people who stay long term. And when I started the community, I really, really wanted it to be a long term community. And in fact, I was like slightly resentful of like the short term people because I think there's a lot of flightiness in my generation, a lot of like nomadism, which I think can be very healthy. But also, there's kind of this phenomenon where people will show up to your community, they'll like have a great time, and then they'll leave. And if you are a long term person, it can make your life feel much more unstable, where you make a really deep friendship and then suddenly your friend is gone, and then it feels like you're constantly cycling through friends. And so I wanted to find the right balance of having long-term people and short-term people. I think I have realized that the that short-term people can add a lot as well. I think a lot of the kind of dynamism of here is that like when you come in short-term, the people who come here short-term sometimes end up socializing like absolutely. Like they wake up in the morning, they're like social all day. Even if they're working, they're like in the co-working space, and so they're kind of like socializing as they work in a way. Um, and they just have infinite energy towards the community, versus I don't think that's actually super sustainable long term. So like a lot of the long-term residents have lives that probably look a lot more kind of like normal, where they spend a lot of time by themselves and spend a lot of time outside of the community as well, and also come to events and have friends here and love living here. So it's a big mix. I'm curious. We're only I think we're less than 2 years in, so I'm not really sure like what the really long term looks like. I can speak for myself that I basically lived here for 2 years, and then essentially once I found out I was pregnant, I was like, okay, I think like I want to create the next fractal. I think I love living here, but it's not actually the place that I would want to raise my baby. Um, and so yeah, I'm curious to see as everyone kind of progresses and their lives evolve, like what that looks like.
So if someone that's watching this was like really curious and like, could they come and experience it for a month? Is that something that
Yes, yes. And in fact, that is one of the benefits of living here as a long-term resident is New York is like really expensive. Rent is really expensive here. And what we do is we have this like subletters form, and I can give you the link later so you can put it in the show notes. But essentially, we have the subletters form, and because a lot of people know about us, there's like lots and lots of people who fill out the subletters form. And what that means is that anytime you travel, you can fill your room with somebody, and they're somewhat pre-vetted, and you might do an interview with them or something like that. So because we want to make sure we bring in people to the community who will contribute back, but what's cool is it almost makes you feel like going on a vacation is free, because if your rent is covered, and New York rent is so expensive, that kind of covers your flights and covers your Airbnb sometimes and stuff like that. And so I actually think a lot of people come here and end up traveling more than they did before, because it just feels like it's more accessible.
Yes. Intriguing. Very cool. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about parenting in this lifestyle, because I know I've had like different ideas. I'm like, during the summers, rather than getting my kids into kids club, like why don't I collaborate with a bunch of other parents? We all have a day, and then we look after each other's kids, and then we'll teach them whatever we're good at. We can kind of do classes with them. I'm intrigued to know what you've thought of in terms of potentially some alternative parenting ideas with community at the heart of it. Mind?
Yeah. Yeah, I've definitely daydreamed about this stuff, and I'm very curious. I still feel like I'm too far away from it to really know what would work and what is really just a daydream. There are people in history who have done this. My favorite is Marie Curie. Marie Curie basically worked with like all the other professors at her college to start like schooling each other, and so there's like all these little kids who learned science from Marie Curie, which is kind of wild. And the only thing is that lasted maybe like 2 years or something. And I think the reason was, all these professors are already hard at work and have a lot on their plate. And so it seems like just from reading about it that it went well for the kids, but it was not necessarily sustainable for the parents. And I think that's kind of the hard part, is that you either need a lot of people who have like a lot of flexibility in their work, or who aren't working and they're full-time stay-at-home parents. I suspect I will school my kids through like a bit of a mix of sometimes kind of more traditional school, not traditional schooling necessarily. I'm really into Montessori schooling. My husband used to work for a Montessori school, and I would feel pretty confident sending my kids to like a really good Montessori school. And I also think probably there will be years where they'll just be schooled at home and maybe schooled in community with our friends. I'm also very, very excited about my kids being able to learn from my friends, especially since they all live so close and since they're also involved in our lives. And so, you know, I have friends have so many skills, but one thing I've been thinking about is how a lot of them speak languages that I don't speak. Like one of my best friends speaks German. He also lives in the same house as me. And so I've told him, like, you should just be talking to my daughter in German, like for the first couple of years, because kids just like soak that stuff up. And so it would be very cool for her to, you know, naturally have some sense of German as she grows older.
Mm. And I think just having those consistent grown-ups in your life, especially when you're living away from your own family, and childhood friends, like I'm finding that, and I feel like it is really important so that your children feel safe. They've got extra people around them, familiar faces that are constant in their lives. I think this is a real gift that we can give to our children.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, when I look back at my childhood, I don't feel like there were many adults that I was very close to. I had a couple of neighbors who were very sweet, but none of them that I really, you know, deeply trusted. And I remember being in like my early 20s and having a conversation with my best friend where we were kind of like, okay, we're each other's like adults now, even though we still felt like kids at the time. And and yeah, there was some kind of sense I had of a lack of community growing up.
Mm. And so a lot of what we've spoken about is kind of physical, the physical community, the people that are there in the different spaces. Is there a digital part of this mix? Is there a digital hub that members can use that they have their profiles on? How are they connected when they're not seeing one another?
Yeah, we have a Discord server, and the Discord server can be joined by anyone within our broader network. And so there's like 400 people in there or something like that. But then we also have certain channels that are kind of gate kept based on like if you live here or you know if you're participating in certain classes, things like that. So yeah, that's probably our main kind of digital hub. And yeah, I have considered like, okay, what would it look like if we had more of like a social media or something like that, like a profile in a way that you can kind of look up other people. Um, I don't know. Yeah, maybe we'll pursue something like that at some point.
If a big thing about the work that you do is about it being decentralized to take the pressure off, then yeah, I guess it will weigh up. Like nice to be able to see someone's profile, but then who's going to be the manager of that? Or can people manage their own profiles? Hmm.
Exactly, exactly. I think if we did it, it would be like I know there's all these kind of Twitter offshoots, like I don't know, Mastodon and stuff like that. I'm not totally sure how they work, but I think some of them you can create communities within them. So it would definitely be like using some sort of platform that just like enables us to have a community that's kind of closed, but also doesn't need top-down management.
Yeah, the one that they used at the eco village that we're at is called Mighty Networks. And I think they use those at quite a lot of communities. And actually Mighty Networks, like I would create my own profile on that. So maybe that is a bit more self-managed.
Yeah, I'll check it out. That sounds awesome. Yeah.
You mentioned about Marie Curie before. Is there anyone else or any other communities who've inspired your journey and kind of supported you to really have the impact that Fractal is having on so many people and doing amazingly well by the sounds of it, bearing in mind it's only been going for 2 years. It's incredible.
Yeah, yeah, there are many, and they're almost all based in San Francisco, where I used to live. So there's one community. Uh, there's okay, I don't exactly know how to describe it. So there's something called Hate Street Commons, which is like an umbrella organization for co-living houses in San Francisco, but it's run by an anarchist and it's very like it's super decentralized and very illegible. But they kind of provide you a lot of tools. So they have example lease agreements and they have house documentation and stuff like that. So if you're trying to start a house, they have a lot of helpful tools for you. And our house was part of it in San Francisco. And then kind of under that organization, there were a lot of co-living houses in San Francisco that had like reached iconic status and were doing really, really interesting work. One of my favorite was actually this house that was for ex-cons. I think it was for people who had life in prison sentences and then came out on parole. And so it's just very inspiring to see like what could co-living in the future look like. And so in this case, I mean, it was really, really impactful for people who essentially don't usually have a way to reintegrate into society and often come out and can't find jobs and are depressed and maybe are estranged from friends and family. And so, yeah, it's really, really fun to kind of read about those stories. Also, there's an amazing publication called Super Nuclear that is edited by two friends of mine. And they just write a lot of articles about how to run co-living houses. And we have a guest post on there. Basically, a lot of co-living houses will write guest posts there as well about how their houses work. So then you can get a lot of inspiration from other houses. Then there's also an amazing project in San Francisco that started after I left, but it's called the Neighborhood San Francisco. And that goal is essentially creating a campus with a lot of people living within walking distance of one another. And they have like this amazing third space. And that was for us actually really the main inspiration for Fractal is we said, okay, we should basically bring that model here to New York. So yeah, those are probably my top three influences, although there are many.
Amazing. Amazing. And do you have kind of fractal values, or do you have anything that when new members are interested, you are able to know that they are going to be the right fit for the community?
That's a great question. I would say we value curiosity and playfulness and open-mindedness, but I think it's very hard to put a vibe into words, basically. And so I don't know. I really strongly believe in this concept of illegibility, which is like it's really there's something that breaks when you try to like really like carefully denote like this person is, you know, a fractal person and this person is not. Yeah, mostly I want them to be like community oriented enough to kind of like contribute to the community, to like be like a positive some force. But within that, I would love there to be like a lot of diversity and interests and even just in the way people approach life.
Nice. And just all about reciprocity by the sounds of things. Like money just hasn't come up in anything that I've read about you and your work. Does money play a part in any of this, or do you try and not let that dictate what goes on at Fractal?
Yeah, we try for it to play a relatively small role. We definitely are not a commune. We don't want to combine finances or anything like that. And what's cool is that because people sign for their own apartment units, essentially you're kind of just transacting with a landlord who's pretty much unrelated to us. And even like if you lived anywhere else in New York City, you also would essentially have to have a lease somewhere with a landlord. So there's no added real economic, you know, portion to Fractal. We have a third space, and the third space so far has just been open to everyone. They have something called an open collective, which is similar to a Patreon. So you can sign up and kind of donate to them monthly, but it's not required and it's not even expected really. I mean, I think kind of a subset of people at Fractal contribute to that. And so, yeah, it's mostly just people kind of hosting events because they want to, and it brings joy to their life and connecting with each other because they want to. And yeah, I mean, so we also run Fractal University, and that's very interesting in that those are classes, and those are often paid classes. A teacher can decide, like, do I want to charge for this class or not? But yeah, that's paid classes, and so some people can make money basically via teaching classes. And so I just taught a class last semester, and I actually made like $1,000, which was really fun for me because to me it felt like just like a free $1,000 because I was teaching this class about how to live near your friends. And that's just like a subject I love talking about, I love teaching about. And like through teaching that class, I made a number of friends. So to me, it doesn't really feel like work. And so it's kind of fun that there's this extra kind of economic component to it. But overall, it doesn't involve money very much.
Yeah. But But saying that, like, you've obviously invested quite a lot of your time and energy creating this. So it seems sensible that you should have some kind of financial remuneration. And I know we're both connected with Richard Bartlett, and I had him on my podcast in the summer. And that was one of the things that he said, that community builders just don't really get paid for the amazing and invaluable work that they do to bring people together. That you can't, it's very hard to charge, and at the same time you're working while everyone else is having a good time a lot of the time as well. I guess not so much if other people are putting on the events, you can kind of go and enjoy them. Yeah, I don't know if you've got any thoughts in that area of community builders actually having a sustainable way to continue their efforts.
Yeah, and to me, I feel like there's like a budding new role of kind of community builder. And obviously we've had community builders for centuries, but one way I think about it is I actually think that a lot of the role I'm taking on was similar to the role that pastors used to take on, which is basically like you are kind of like, I don't know, you're bringing people together, you're kind of aware of lots of different people's needs. Sometimes you can be somebody's confidant, things like that. And so the way we used to fund that is essentially people would often give donations to the church. And so, yeah, I'm very curious to see like how that plays out going forward. Like, will there be more kind of social clubs where people are kind of just donating and then that's being funneled to people who are doing social work? Um, but I'm not sure if that's necessarily the case, that like that's necessarily where the world should go or will go. I think the way I think about it is I think of myself almost like an indie hacker. And so I suspect that most of the money I make will be kind of through indie projects. I'm actually about to start writing a book called How to Live Near Your Friends, an ebook. And so and I've managed to make money in various ways in the last year, through kind of like strange side projects. And so yeah, I think long term I'll probably find some sort of path that is helped by the community work I do and is relevant to it and kind of helps push it forward, but isn't necessarily being paid directly for what I'm doing. That said, we actually like we have had multiple people offer to fund what we're doing, although we have never accepted it because it's never quite been the terms we want. But yeah, there's like a lot of interest around this stuff, and there are people out there who want to support you. And so yeah, definitely, I feel like I'm at the frontier of something, and we're all trying to figure out, okay, what does this look like sustainably long term? But also, it doesn't worry me very much. I
Yeah.
feel confident in kind of like where it's all going. And I should say, by trade, I'm a software engineer, as is my husband, and we've been on sabbatical for a while, but we also have the ability to kind of make money when and if we need it. So
Beautiful. That's a nice feeling to have.
yeah.
And something that just come up when you were talking about almost having the role of a pastor and understanding different people's needs. And a good friend of mine who is a community builder, some conflict that she has in her own life is that because she's always the one creating the events and she's always present, but people then assume, if we think back to Dunbar's number and the different spheres, they then assume that she's in their kind of inner spheres in Dunbar's number, whereas for her, they wouldn't necessarily be in her inner spheres, and she's not able to kind of speak openly and honestly about her life with these people. Has that come up, or is there anything that you do to kind of protect yourself and have healthy boundaries in place to kind of manage your energy as someone that is very present and facilitating all of this?
Yeah, I've struggled with that a little bit, although it doesn't feel like a present struggle for me. So one thing is I do say no a lot, and luckily, I actually think living in New York, people are really used to being told no. Like New York is just a very interesting place. There's like a ton of social abundance here actually compared to most places. And just like you can be very active living here. And so for any given event that you're invited to, you kind of expect that people will often just be like, oh, I can't come or I don't want to come or whatever. And so, yeah, I try to just like tune into myself and be like, okay, do I want to hang out with this person? Do I want to go to this event? I will say I think there was a time where the stress was kind of building when I was still living in Fractal One, where I would almost like run into too many people per day. And I think I have other friends in Fractal who didn't really struggle with this because I think yeah, because I play this particularly central role, there's like a lot of people who, I don't know, maybe might want to talk to me, or especially guests, actually. A lot of times people are just hanging out around our community and they're like really excited about it. And so then they're also like really excited about me because they're like, oh, wow, how did you build this? And they have all these infinite questions for me. And that can be kind of fun, but it can kind of, feel like too much sometimes. And so, yeah, for me, I think actually moving to this new house, which is much smaller, and we have people within walking distance, but I feel like a little bit more of the ability to kind of like choose who I'm spending time with and when has been helpful, definitely.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. Moving out of the eco village and back to modern life. And we now live close to where we used to live. So we have people around us. But I remember when we first moved here and it was such a relief to to kind of have that privacy again and know that I can walk out and I'm not going to see people straight away. Like you can choose when you hang out with people. So I hear you. And something that I heard a little bit earlier is about how you got started and those regular Sunday gatherings. And maybe as we wrap up, just talking about this for people that really love the idea of this and how you got started and how they may want to get started by hosting these regular dinners.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like a weekly dinner party is essentially minimum viable community. And the key thing is hosting weekly, essentially. Like the key thing is the consistency. And so the way you do it is you want to make hosting so easy that you can do it every week. And so I think a lot of times when people host, especially if they don't host too often, it's kind of like, they fully clean their house and they cook this amazing, 4-course meal. And so we would host a weekly dinner party, but it was like super grungy. It was like, we'd spend 5 minutes cleaning beforehand. We kind of developed a system for like turning our apartment from like regular mode into party mode. And so, for example, we had like those colored light bulbs where we could change them from like a normal lighting to like pink lighting and blue lighting. And we had these little remote controls. And so we could literally just press a button and kind of like turn on party mode in our apartment. And we had a couple other little tricks, like we had this projector that we would sometimes use to watch movies. But for parties, I would basically just like look on YouTube for something like psychedelic visuals, and we would kind of project these visuals on the wall. But all of those things, those take like 1 minute to set up. So we would do that, and then we actually would not cook. We would order Thai food, and Thai food, I think, is like an amazing party secret because it really accommodates a lot of dietary needs. There's a lot of vegan Thai food, just not ordering from a special place, just ordering from a normal Thai place. There's a lot of vegetable dishes that you can ask, and they're often vegan. There's a lot of like gluten-free and lactose-free Thai food. Like most Thai food is gluten and lactose-free. And probably near you there's like a relatively cheap Thai place. So overall, I think it's like the optimal party food. And basically every week we would just order a bunch of Thai food. We would kind of like press a few buttons and transform our space, and we'd spend 5 minutes cleaning up, and then we would welcome all our friends.
And then with the friends, like bring their own drinks or whatever to make that really easy for you guys.
Yes. I mean, so in the invite, we basically asked for donations. We said, if you want to contribute towards the Thai food, then, just Venmo me. And then, a handful of people would end up showing up with drinks each week, but it was probably in the minority. Honestly, I just wouldn't worry about it. It's like, I don't know, people can drink water. We had a sink with water, and people could go drink water. And, if they were opinionated about what they wanted to drink, especially because it was, a regular party, so people would come back week after week, they knew the deal, and they could bring their own stuff if they wanted to.
Yeah. Just trust that it's all going to work out, and not putting too much pressure on yourself or other people, and just allowing them to bring what feels good for them.
Exactly.
So weekly is really important, the regularity. And what about size of space? Like, do you think some people might be thinking, oh, I just haven't got, my space isn't big enough? Or how many people is too many? How many people is too small? Have you got kind of numbers that you would suggest?
Yeah, so I live in New York City, so our apartments are relatively small. I live in Brooklyn, and in fact, we kind of chose to put the community like just far enough out in Brooklyn that the apartments are kind of big enough to host, in my opinion. But essentially, we would cap attendance at 30 people, and even at 30, it could feel pretty overwhelming. It could be, a standing room only. You're eating your Thai food standing up. You're chatting, and it could be loud. And yeah, I mean, I think you can do it at any size. When we first started, like our very first Sunday dinner was 6 people, and that was awesome. And then basically what happens is if you start hosting every week, then people will often ask, like, oh, can I bring my friend? Can I bring my sister? And eventually it just grows and grows. And eventually it grew to the point where it was like, okay, we actually cannot welcome this many people in our home. And that was kind of awkward to kind of work that out because we had a lot of people who were really excited to come every week. Um, but yeah, I think like 4 or 5 people on upwards is going to be fun.
Amazing. Priya Rose, I'm so excited for everything that you shared today, and I'm so excited to follow your journey to see what happens when the baby comes along and how that chapter evolves. And I'll be watching out for your book when that's going to be released. Is that likely to be this year in 2024?
But that's my goal. Yeah.
Oh, best of luck bringing that to light.
Thank you.
And where's the best person? We will include some links below, but is there kind of one dedicated place where people generally come to find you?
Yeah, I'm most active on Twitter. So my Twitter is Goose, Pri Goose.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time today.
Awesome. Thank you for interviewing me. This was great. This was so fun.